checking in. I really appreciate your patience with me while we sorted out a couple little errors that we had going on here, or tech challenges. Most of you know that there's plenty of reasons why I don't work for NASA, and this is one of them for sure. So I want to welcome you to this masterclass for understanding lateral work. I'm really excited to be able to offer this to you in this way. Again, really sorry for the delay. For some reason, through this group, Facebook thought I've never done a live event before or a live video, so I had to go through a whole new process to get into it. Anyway, so for this masterclass, just want to take a couple minutes here and chat with you guys again, reiterate sort of how this is going to roll. So we've got our live lecture happening tonight, and then after the lecture is over tonight, we're going to, or this morning or this afternoon, depending on, I guess, where you're watching from. But after this live lecture is over, I'm going to post the link in the guide for the leg yield. That's going to give you access to the first video breakdown for the leg yield movement, or the leg yield module. And then next week we're going to have our Q&A on that. Now in the meantime, if you want to share your struggles, ask questions, things like that about the video or about the leg yield specifically, within that guide, you'll be able to do that. You can even, I think you should also be able to post some videos and things like that if you're looking for a little bit of coaching with that. So hopefully that'll work out. And then next week when we go live for that, we will be putting out a Zoom link that everybody will have access to. That link will be provided in this discussion group. So that's how you'll access that. That's how you'll be able to log into that Zoom meeting when we do that live. So the way that my lectures always work, I know several of you that have joined on with us today have been to my live lectures in the past. If you have any questions during this lecture, of course it's not like you can just chime in, raise your hand, reach out, shout out, but please feel free to submit your questions into the discussion here with the video. I've got a new friend, David Koss. He's sitting behind the camera on the couch here, and we've got Tyler Leary, our working student. She's also on the couch behind the camera here, and Tyler's going to be fielding the questions when they come up. What I'm going to try to do is at the end of each individual segment, that's when I'll be taking the questions. So feel free to put your questions in as they come up, but we've got different sections of this lecture where we're going to be talking about terms. We're going to be talking a little bit about anatomy, and then we're going to get into our movements. So at the end of my discussion of each of those sections, that's where I'll be able to take your questions to help solidify anything that may have been confusing or anything along those lines. So I'm just going to give a little check here and see. Oh, it looks like, I don't know if you guys are getting it, but there's captions that are popping up on my side of this, and it looks like we've got quite a few people in here. Let me know if the audio is working. Somebody, Mary, just posted, said that the video keeps getting interrupted, so I'm really sorry about that, Mary. Are you feeling it okay?
Yeah.
Tyler? Okay. So that may be a challenge on your end there, Mary. I have no idea. Again, this is many reasons why I don't work for NASA. But so keep sending in your questions. Hello, Tracy from Ontario. Are you able to hear me well? Is everybody able to hear the audio on here? Okay, Shandon, audio sounds good. Allison, thank you. Okay, great. We've got lots of comments chiming in here. So that means that we've got lots of you with us live, and that's super exciting. So I'm really, really stoked about this masterclass, not just because this is one of my favorite lectures, but also for the broad reach that we have. We've got folks from all over the world that have signed on for this class, and I'm super stoked about that. So thank you all for your interest. Thank you for your time. And of course, this evening, thank you for your patience with this. And as I mentioned in one of the messages in the discussion group, feel free to give me your feedback if you've got other pieces that you'd like to see added to this, or if you have potential ideas for future master classes. Please feel free. Let me know so that we can maybe tweak things as we go to make it a better learning experience for you. That's what I'm all about. That's what this whole deal is about. So let's talk a little bit about lateral work, shall we? That's the whole reason why you guys are here. What we want to talk about first is a little bit of kind of terms, okay, so that we're all on the same page when we're talking about terms. And you can see I've got the white wall set up behind me here, and I'll try to make sure that my drawings are big enough that you can see them from the from your screen as we do it. I know Jenny said that she was able to link her computer to her TV, so she's seeing me massive, larger than life kind of deal. So that's awesome. Surely she'll be able to see great graphics there. So anyway, the first terms that we want to talk about when we're talking about our lateral work is I want to talk about our arena lines and our arena tracks. Now, I'm going to be talking about this primarily from a dressage perspective, and I know that a lot of you that are watching are not necessarily dressage riders as we would talk about it. Some of you come from a ranching background. Some of you are more Western trainers. Lots of jumpers have signed on for this. We've got folks from all across disciplines, and I think that's fantastic because the lateral work is really important for all of our horses for developing strength and that sort of thing. So I want to talk about these terms first, and again, a lot of them are going to be kind of dressage based terms, but I just want to put them out here so that everybody understands what we're talking about. Because one thing I find is that from one discipline to the next, it's pretty common to hear terms that differ. I had a discussion with a friend of mine, a Western Foundation trainer, and we were talking about all the different ways that we talk about bend or the counter arc, or different ways that it gets called, whatever it happens to be. So I just want to start out by clarifying what some of these things are. So again, first thing we want to talk about is the arena lines and the arena tracks. So if we were, let's say we're in, are we in with? We're not in with that marker. So let's say we're in our arena, okay? Whether it's a dressage arena or whatever. If we were, so the purple line here is going to be my fence line, right? Or my perimeter line. The basic lines that we talk about riding would be center line. You can imagine where that goes, right? Our center line is going to come down the center of the arena, all right? Now, if you're out riding in a pasture, if you're out riding in a field, if you're, riding in a much larger space, you get to decide where a lot of these are if you're not confined by specific walls, okay? And that's fine, but what we want to really be sure of is that you define it, that it's not some random line somewhere that you're not able to track yourself on to see, am I actually tracking straight? I hope that makes sense. Now, when we're talking about, when we're referring to the videos for each individual video module and things like that, you'll hear me talk about center line. You'll hear me talk about quarter line. So our quarter lines would be fairly obvious, I think, but our quarter lines would be splitting our centers, our half arenas there, in half there. So dividing the arena up then into 4 individual pieces, okay? So if we're tracking, say we're tracking to the right around the arena and we ask you to come down a center line, you'd be coming down here, right? If you're tracking left or right, doesn't matter, but say here we're tracking to the left and we ask you to come down a quarter line, you're going to be coming down our far quarter line here as you're tracking around. Again, just explaining this for clarity so that everybody's on the same page. Now, we also talk about individual tracks that are separate from center line, quarter line, okay? When we talk about the outside track, I feel like most riders can understand what that means. The outside track would be the width of your horse on the fence, okay? Or on the exterior of the arena. That's your outside track. Now, growing up from a Western background, it seemed like anytime anybody said something about going to the inside, it was basically any space that wasn't the outside track, okay? Which makes sense, but when we talk about riding on the inside track, that doesn't mean any random place inside here. In fact, we're going to be pretty specific. So if our outside track is this width of our horse here on the fence, and I were to ride on the inside track, I would be just to the inside of that position. So if you were riding with a friend, you'd be banging your knees together as you're going down the wall. If you were to ride on what we'll call the third track, you'd be that third horse in here. Okay? If you can picture a group of riders moving in unison, all abreast, head to head as they go down the arena, let's say you've got 6 riders. Let's say you've got 6 riders side by side. The rider along the wall would be rider number 1, they're on the first track. Rider number 2, second track. Third track, fourth track, fifth track, sixth track, whatever. You can make it up as deep as you want to go with it. We want to think about when we're talking about deviating from our tracks. We're going somewhere specific. We're planning where we're going. And we're able to keep track of that. If you're riding on the inside track or the second track at the start of the arena, and by the time you get to the end of the arena you're 20 feet from the fence, you're not on the inside track anymore. So that's something that you want to really think about. This is about being able to be accurate and specific with your horse where you want to go. Okay? So that's the difference between our arena lines and our arena tracks. Okay? Sometimes, going back to the arena lines, sometimes you'll hear someone talk about a half school, and that would be a line across this way. Okay? You don't hear that term used very often, but it's an important one to know. It's an important one to think about. Right. So we'll talk also about our circle sizes. That's important when we get into our lateral work, specifically from a measurement and an angle perspective. Okay? When we talk about our circles, oftentimes with our lateral work, we're talking about a 10-meter circle, because for most of our horses, our lateral work properly operates on a 10-meter bend. Okay? Those of us that aren't measuring in meters, that would be measured out in feet. So we'd be looking at a 10-meter circle, about 33 feet, right? 33 feet across. So 10 meters is going to be most often the circle that we're going to be talking about when we're circling, okay? Or when we talk about releasing to the circle. We're releasing to the circle that matches the bend of the lateral work that we're talking about, okay? Now, on our circles also, we could have different tracks. Can we still see the camera here? Yeah. Let's say I'm riding a circle. Maybe I'm riding, in this case, a 20-meter circle, okay? My horse being on the track of that circle, I could ride my horse then to the inside track of that circle, all right? And I suppose if you wanted to call it that way, you could ride your horse to the outside track of that circle. You're just growing your circle larger, okay? So when we talk about our tracks, it's not just in the arena space, it's also in relationship to the circles that we're making. Looking down here, I have notes made up so that I don't miss or skip anything. Now, we'll talk a little bit when we're riding our horse. We'll hear reference to inside and outside. And you're going to hear a ton of that in this lecture when we talk about our aids. That's something that I want to think about here also. If you're riding your horse on a circle or an egg, as I'm more appropriately drawn. So here's our horse riding on the circle. I think when you look at it this way, it's pretty easy to understand inside aids, or the inside of the horse's body, or the inside of the bend, is anything that's going to happen on the inside of that circle. Okay? The outside aids, the outside body, the outside of the bend is anything that's going to be happening on the outside of that circle. Okay? Now, when you're going around the large arena, or when you're traveling, let's say, again, you're coming from a ranch, you're riding out in the fields, you're riding even on the trail, something like that. If your horse is perfectly straight, you get to decide what's inside and what's outside. Okay? If you're coming up into a bend in your arena, or on your trail, or in your field, it'll be more obvious what is inside and what is outside. But when you're tracking perfectly straight, you get to decide what that is. What we don't want to do is leave that up to our horse necessarily, because they're going to be looking back to us for what it is we're asking for. And if we don't have any idea, then now we're both lost, basically. So inside and outside, you're going to hear a ton of that when it comes to your seat, your legs, your reins, all of those things. One other thing we want to talk about is straight. So since we mentioned inside and outside, straight, we want to talk about flexion, and we want to talk about bend. This is something I'm going to draw out for you on here as well. When we talk about flexion, for the sake of this lecture, for the sake of our lateral work, when we're talking about flexion, flexion happens in the head and neck. Okay? So we've got our horse here, his head and neck is bent. The head and neck bending one way or another, we'll refer to that as the flexion. Okay? So we can have left flexion, right flexion, inside flexion, outside flexion. We can talk about specifically pole flexion, and I've got skeleton here with me that I can show you a little bit about that when we get into that topic. We can talk about flexion in the rest of the neck as well. Flexion, for the sake of this discussion, is in the head and neck. Okay? Bend, on the other hand, is through the length of the body. Okay? We would say that the bend happens from nose to tail, essentially. One of my mentors, Ray Hunt, used to talk about getting the horse on your line from the first whisker in his nose to the last hair in his tail. He was talking about that horse in bend or in straightness, right, depending on that position. But he was talking about getting that horse into alignment. Now, a tricky part here, when we talk about our horse being straight, straight doesn't necessarily mean a perfectly straight line. If I were riding this horse here on about a 10-meter circle, and his body was matching the angle and the arc of my circle perfectly, we would say that he was straight on my circle. What we're meaning in that case is he's in alignment. His spine is in alignment with the circle that we're trying to ride. Okay? You could be straight in a very straight, linear sense, or you could be straight on the figure that you're riding. When we talk straightness, we're talking alignment in that sense. Any deviation from that, we would say the horse is not straight on your circle. The horse is not straight on your line, or he's not straight in the movement that you're asking for. Okay? I hope that's making sense to everybody. You can see, doing this live, there's lots of times that you may want to go back and check on things. So we're going to leave this video up that you can go back and review it if you need to, if you have a need for that. So we've talked about our arena lines, our arena tracks, our circle size. We've talked about the inside and the outside of the bend. And we've talked here about the difference between bend, straightness, and flexion. All right. I'm going to take a minute here to see if we have any questions before we get into working with the skeleton. Tyler, are there anything that's popped up?
No, there's just the lights on the whiteboard. Someone's asking if we could play with.
Uh-oh, can we play with the lights on the whiteboard? Oh, boy.
There were lights on the whiteboard.
Well, the light's flashing up here, so I may even, let me see if yeah, that's not going to help anything if I change position. We'll try to tweak the lighting as we go here, and hopefully that can help us a little bit here. Oh yeah, we can twist that one a little bit, see what we get. Meh.
There's a question.
Oh, we have a question, okay.
When horse is not flexing correctly, why is this usually happening?
Oh boy, when a horse is not flexing correctly, why is this usually happening? That's a simple question with not such a simple answer, but going back again to the idea of flexion happening in the head and neck. So why would the horse not be flexing properly? The first thing that I would want to do would be to check my aids, and this is something that we're going to get into as we go. Oftentimes an incorrect flexion would be a deviation from what we might call a proper rein length or a proper connection with the bridle. Now that's going to be the simplest way to solve that if that's the challenge. Another reason that might come up for that would be that the horse simply doesn't understand. So we talk about shoulders bulging, or we talk about deviations in that way, or the horse is spooking at something and looking the other way or whatever. Maybe he's bracing and resistant to the bit left or right, that sort of thing. That's going to come down to an understanding of the aids on our horse's part. So the first thing we want to do is check our presentation of the aids, and then we want to also check our horse's understanding of the aids. That's going to be the two simplest ways to talk about adjusting flexion if the horse is not following it the way that we are asking them to. Now, another thing from there is we would want to look at anything physically. I see in the clinics that I teach, the horses that I work with, I see lots of challenges pop up where we've got physical issues that are plaguing the horse. Maybe a dental issue, maybe a TMJ issue, something chiropractic, things like that. That can also be a cause for a horse not flexing properly in the way that we're hoping for, or the way that we're asking for. So.
Someone's asking you to clarify that straightness on a circle means not falling in or out, correct?
Absolutely. Straightness on the circle definitely means not falling in or out. Straightness on the circle would mean following the line of that circle. And I'm glad that that question comes up, because I think it's important that we also talk, this is a deviation from my notes, but it should have been in there. I think it's important that we also talk about the 3 planes of balance with our horse, okay? And this is where dropping in, dropping out of the circle is something that'll come up. If we look at this horse that we have right here, we're talking about one plane of balance, and that's the lateral balance, right? So that refers to the question that we're talking about here, the horse falling in on the circle or falling out on the circle. So lateral balance is one of the first planes of balance when we're talking about this with our horses. The second plane of balance, I'm going to see if I have other marker colors that work in here for us. The other plane of balance that we would talk about would be longitudinal balance. Okay? Longitudinal balance is going to be our horse in length. Obviously, I'm not going to quit my day job and go try to be an artist or anything. But the longitudinal balance is the length of the horse's body. Where is the balance in that perspective? Is our balance to the forehand? Is our balance more to the haunches? Is our balance more even in the middle? That's what we're talking about when we talk about our longitudinal balance. Okay, so we've got lateral, the side bend, maybe we might call it, right, of the horse's body. We've got longitudinal, the length bend of the horse's body. And then another one that I see oftentimes overlooked is the vertical balance in our horse. Okay, that's if we've got our horse tracking straight, or I shouldn't say tracking straight. Wherever we're looking at our horse, it's how is that horse in stability-wise. Tyler's giggling, I think, at my drawing right there. That looks pretty awful. But if we're talking vertical balance, think about, you've likely heard somebody talk about a horse turning like a motorcycle, leaning and tipping over, right? That's the vertical balance that we're talking about. If our horse is straight in their vertical balance, that's what we're aiming for, rather than leaning one way or another. That tells us that they're basically in synchronicity with gravity, right? They're not working against gravity, more loading one side of the body or another to support themselves and keep from falling down. So again, our 3 planes of balance that are going to always be important to think about. Lateral balance, or the side bend balance, right? The longitudinal balance, the length of the body balance, and then the vertical balance. How upright is that horse in relationship to the ground, essentially?
Would flexion be considered suppleness?
Whoa, would flexion be considered suppleness? That's a really great question. Potentially. I suppose that depends on how we're asking for our flexion. You could have a horse in proper flexion that's not at all supple, right? The horse could be braced into that. So technically they're going to be two separate things. If we're asking for suppleness, we're going to certainly be aware of flexion. I hope that's a clear enough way of answering that question. So I would call them two separate things, but I would say that they are importantly linked within the body.
Can you have bend without flexion?
Can you have bend without flexion? I think that's a super awesome question too. I would say you can have flexion without bend, right? If the horse's body is more straight, but the neck is bending, flexing, right? You can have flexion in the neck and head without bend through the length of the body. But you cannot have proper bend without proper flexion. Okay, we think about it when we talk about the connection of the pole. We talk about the pole flexion as being the doorway to the rest of the spine. If that's going to be braced, there's going to be brace, there's going to be blockage through the rest of the body.
Do you ask for flexion first and then bend?
Oh, that's a good one. Do we ask for flexion first and then bend? And actually, gang, let me know if you can hear Tyler reading the question to me, so that everybody's aware of the question that's coming through. Otherwise, I can repeat it if we need to. So go back to that one.
Do you ask for flexion first and then bend?
Do we ask for flexion first and then bend? And I think that's going to be dependent on where you and your horse are in your current training. I do a lot of in-hand work where we'll talk about flexion first, okay? But if I'm asking for lateral movement, say I want shoulder in, I'm going to be assuming that flexion or the releasing of the joints and things like that in the way that we're talking about it here is already there, and then we're going to ask for the bend to come into that. So I'm going to say yes sometimes, not always, right? I would teach potentially flexion first to get access to the rest of the body, but the flexion and the bend are something that we're going to just always be aware of, and we're always going to be navigating, do we need more, do we need less in one place or another? That's probably a bad answer for that question because it's not a very clear answer, right? But I hope that's helpful.
One more. To get a young horse to balance better, is it best to keep on the circles?
To get a young horse to balance better, is it best to keep on the circles? Again, that's going to be a yes, maybe. Really, when we're talking about getting young horses to balance best, it's best to get out of the darned arena and go out into the world, right, and ride up and down hills and things like that. Your circles are going to be a place where you can help to find and regain balance. But when we're talking about helping young horses, or really helping any horses build better balance, we don't want to just stay fixed on a figure. We don't want to just say, okay, I'm only circling. But we also want to get out and use the body in different ways. And nobody educates balance in the body better than Mother Nature does. So if we were going to call a best practices to helping develop balance, I would say an awareness of all these things from the rider, and getting out in real territory is going to be the best way. The best way, in quotations there, because it's also going to be dependent on the horse specifically.
There's another one.
Okay, one more.
How do you define hyperflexion, meaning behind the vertical, correct flexion, and in front of the bit?
Okay, ask that one again. How do you define
hyperflexion?
Hyperflexion.
Meaning behind the vertical. She put that in parentheses.
Okay.
Correct flexion, and being in front of the bit.
And in front of the bit. Okay, hyperflexion, correct flexion, and in front of the vertical, or behind the vertical, correct flexion, and in front of the bit. Okay, so in front of the bit, this is where I'm so glad that this is coming up in this section of the discussion, because to me this is about semantics, right? And this is about where we're breaking down our words and our terms so that we understand what we're talking about. If we talk about the horse being in front of the bit, that can also be similar to what we'd talk about with a horse being in front of the leg or even behind the bit or behind the leg. This is going to have more a feel to it, where you might feel that your horse is not giving you any regard, no matter where their head is positioned necessarily. Now there's above the bit and in front of the bit, okay? Above the bit is going to be a true, like an inversion of the horse. We talk about the horse coming upside down, and they would have a bit of a, this is going to be an exaggerated sketch here, but we talk about that horse coming up with that U-neck, right, and being above the bit, right? Some people refer to like good banana, bad banana, right? Where good banana, we're talking about the longitudinal flexion. Good banana is that rounded back, rounded neck. Bad banana would be that upside down idea right there, okay? Oftentimes a horse that works with the tension in the top line that this posture would provide, or something similar, you'll see quite a bit of an overdevelopment in the under neck muscle. There's a conformational term I don't think we hear as much anymore, but stag-necked, right? Or U-necked is another term. And these are just uses of the body, conformation or posture, that the horse has adapted based on potentially misunderstanding, or also any of those other deviations. Maybe there's something physical plaguing somewhere that's caused them to be that protective of their body. So that would be above the bit. That could also be referred to as in front of the bit. But I would say any time when your horse is kind of rushing ahead of you and pushing into the hands where you feel like, you know, he's not available for questioning. He's kind of in front of the bit at that point in the what we'd call the negative way. Hyperflexion behind the vertical. Hyperflexion is going to be a closing of the throat latch and a drawing back of the nose. We'll hear Charles de Cunfee talk all the time about the horse's nostrils being positioned ahead of the eyeballs. Okay, if we see that horse, when we talk about the behind the vertical is something that gets a lot of attention, where people have this obsession about a horse's nose being on the vertical when they're competing or when they're riding in a frame, because somebody said that the horse's nose, somebody said, horse's nose has to be on a vertical. Oftentimes when they're at that vertical, that's going to be drawing backwards and kind of closing of the throat latch in there. So we want to be mindful, the aim, even here, our position, the nostrils are in front of the eyeballs, okay? An obsession about a vertical position of the head is something that I think, as riders and trainers, we need to kind of throw that away. It's where is our horse in understanding? A way that I like to think about it is that when the body is unlocked, when the spine is released, when we have proper lateral and longitudinal bend, also of course the vertical, but specifically when we have a proper lateral and longitudinal bend, the head will hang where the head belongs, okay? Some horses have an easier time of coming behind the vertical based on the construction of their neck. We see some horses with really kind of tight throat latches, or clean throat latches, some people would call them, and they're super kind of bendy in the neck. It's a different thing if you put the horse's head there versus if the horse has a natural carriage to go there. A horse that's heavy on the forehand, a horse that's not really driving well from behind, not engaging from behind, will often have a tendency to come behind the vertical. So we see it a lot in young horses, or horses that aren't really strong in their carrying muscles. There's a tendency for them to come behind the vertical, and it's not, we see a lot of Facebook keyboard warriors attacking people for horses coming behind the vertical, when a lot of times we will see that happen from a horse that's naturally not strong enough to be carrying himself forward and through. So the correct place, if I'm understanding this question correctly, the correct place is when that top line is released and relaxed and the head hangs like, I think it was Charles de Cunfee who said that the head should hang like a chandelier at the end of the neck. right? It's, everything is relaxed, and that's where the head goes. Okay, I hope that that's a helpful answer for that question. Any other big questions come in there, Tyler? I'm unfortunately going to have to cap how many questions we take with each piece. I want to answer everything I can, but I've been known in this lecture to go for 4 or 5 hours before with covering every question. I don't think you guys want to sit there long enough to listen to all that.
There's one more.
Okay.
Would you teach balance before bend and flexion, or other way around? And by the way, they can hear me.
Perfect. Good. Would we teach balance before bend and flexion, or would we teach it the other way around? I would have to say that those things need to be taught together. When I'm focusing on riding, I was mentioning to a student today, I think about athletic relaxation as being the umbrella that encompasses everything. If we don't have that, we don't have anything worthwhile. Underneath that, we would say balance first, posture second, transportation third. Okay? The balance and the posture, or the balance and the bend in this case, they're going to be very appropriately linked. When we talk about correct bend, if we don't have correct bend, we're likely not going to have correct balance, and vice versa. So they're both important in their own right. It's especially if we have excessive flexion, right? If you've got a horse that's really flexing to the inside, their balance is going to be onto that inside shoulder as well. So that's something that we're going to want to be mindful of. I think that we need to understand them both individually, but we need to be aiming for them both together. So I hope that that's helpful. All right, so on that line, on that note, we want to talk a little bit about some anatomy, okay? So I want to talk more specifically about flexion in the pole, okay, since that's something that comes up quite often, and you're going to see it come up a lot in your lateral work and on your circles as well. So we've got my trusty steed, Janet, here. She's come to visit us. So when we talk about, you guys still see this? When we talk about pole flexion, specifically the pole is that bony lump at the top of the head that sits underneath the foretop. If you have flexion here, you have a serious health issue. Probably means you have a fracture. When we're talking about pole flexion, what we're really talking about is flexion between the skull and the first joint in the neck, the atlas, okay? We have the occiput, okay, the base of the skull, and we have the atlas. And our proper flexion in there, I'm going to try to position this so that you guys can see it well. When we're talking about that flexion, we're talking left to right, okay? Our horses also have a ton of, we'd call it the yes, right? But there's very little of the no articulation, okay, of the lateral left and right. Because basically the way these fit together in here, and because of these paracondylar processes in here that come under the wings of the atlas, there's limited mobility in there, all right? You'll hear me talk quite a bit. You'll hear lots of riders talk about that flexion basically being, if I was to take this to kind of the maximum, eyelashes to the left, eyelashes to the right. We don't have a lot of flexion in the horse's neck in this way, okay? What we tend to see in cases where there's more flexion than that, we tend to see flexion deeper in the neck, often at the base of the neck, at the shoulder. But what we want to be aware of is where's the flexion in every vertebra, right, or in between every vertebra. So pole flexion itself, in the way that we're referring to it here, the lateral flexion of the pole, is very, very limited, okay? And this is something I like to work with a lot on the ground and the bridle before we climb onto the horse's back, just to give them a point of reference and understanding so they know what this lateral flexion looks like. Now, when we focus, especially when we're focusing in hand, something that you may have noticed with your horses, or something that you will hopefully notice, is that when we achieve a releasing of the pole, okay? When I say releasing, I mean the horse is relaxing and allowing the mobility of the skull and the pole, okay? Between that skull and atlas, the atlanto-occipital joint. When the horse releases there, they will almost reflexively give you a length bend in the body, that longitudinal flexion or longitudinal balance that we talk about. Lateral flexion of the pole will often, as a reflex, give us longitudinal flexion through the length of the spine. Okay, so this is again where we talk about this is the doorway to the rest of the spine. If this is braced or tense or there's a restriction in here, it's going to also reflect farther back in the body. Okay, so that's that lateral flexion. Now, what about when we see our horses, and your horses, if you don't have a lot of experience with lateral work and you're just teaching this for the first time, you may see with your horses a crookedness, a head tilt in the pole. If you're already doing lateral work, your horse is already understanding it. You may also sometimes notice that crookedness in the pole. It's important to understand that the pole itself does not, you can see me trying to wiggle this, does not roll. Okay, so from this joint, the horse cannot drop the ears left or right. In fact, the only joint in the horse's neck that allows that rotation to happen is between the atlas and the axis, C1 and C2, the atlantoaxial joint. Here we get rolling, we get rotation that way. Okay, very little, almost we could say none, side to side because of the construction of that joint, but we get more roll in that. So if your horse is dropping in the ears to one side or another, that's going to be reflexive of flexion in that AA joint, the atlantoaxial joint. Okay, so when we're talking about pole flexion, if your horse is dropping an ear, if they're flexing in the AA joint, they will most often be braced in the AO joint, in the pole. Okay, so this is where it's really important when we're riding, whether you're riding a straight line, a circle, lateral work, anything like that, it's important to be aware of the elevation of our horse's ears. Whatever we're asking of our horse, we would aim to keep the ears level with whatever position we ask them to take. If they're unlevel, they're going to be bracing in the pole, and they're also going to be tighter, usually tighter in the shoulder that is associated to the lower ear. That's just another little side piece there for you to think about. So that's what we're looking at when we're talking about flexion in the pole and what tends to happen when we get an ear dropping to one side or another. It's important, I think, also to talk about flexion in the hind legs. Because we're talking about lateral work, we're going to be talking about the horse stepping under their body. Okay? We're going to be talking about the horse stepping toward center of their body, right? Their midline. Okay, if I'm talking about the hindquarters, when we're talking about our lateral work, our aim is to step a hind foot deeper under their center of mass, okay? Their center of weight, their center of gravity. We're stepping deeper underneath here, okay? Ultimately aiming for them to step under the center of the rider's seat as they're coming forward, right? So we want to feel that that hind leg is stepping underneath the body. If our horse steps too far, if they go with that hind leg out beyond, and often you'll see it happen that a horse will come this way, out beyond, that's not engagement of the hind leg, that's disengagement of the hind leg. So that's something really important to think about. We see this often in, imagine a one-rein stop. You've probably all experienced that or seen that at one point or another, where maybe somebody's horse is bolting or somebody gets scared and they bend the horse with the inside rein into a one-rein stop. They're disengaging the horse's hindquarters. When that happens, that hind leg is stepping beyond the center of mass, not toward the center of mass, okay? We think about the hind legs as being the driver, okay, and we're going to talk about that here in a moment also. If I stray from that, Tyler, I'm going to hold you responsible to bring me back to that. Okay. We're talking about the hind leg stepping under the center of the mass so that it can carry the weight, okay? If the hind leg steps beyond the center of mass, it's no longer in a supportive place. I hope that makes sense. And that's where the disengaging of the hindquarters comes in. Another thing that we want to think about, a reason why this comes up as being really important. Let me grab another couple pieces of my skeleton for you. So here I have a horse's pelvis. Okay, now these are two separate horses, so there's not a perfect fit. We have the horse's pelvis and we have a horse's sacrum. This piece of the pelvis here we refer to as the wing of the iliac, right? The joint here where these two connect is the sacroiliac joint, the SI joint, okay? If our horse steps beyond their midline, too sharp, too fast, too often, we're going to end up straining that joint, okay? You've all likely heard of a hunter's bump, and one of the most common that I see causes of a hunter's bump is a strain of that hind leg stepping too deep under, which can be from the horse falling in the paddock or, you know, over hyperextending, you know, when they're galloping or something like that, or sitting into a sliding stop. There's lots of ways that a horse can strain that, but it will certainly strain if we have repeated over tracking of the hind leg under the body. One way that you can experiment with that yourself is if you're standing up facing forward, if you were to take your right foot and step it forward to your midline, you'll feel that you're hopefully, generally, pretty engaged and balanced. You could move off from there. If you take that leg, though, and reach it sideways across and try to stand there and hold that, you're going to feel tension in your low back, okay? Just like what your horse is going to feel. You're now disengaged. It'd be real easy for somebody to tip you over at that point because you're not in a solid balance. So when we step too far, we're deviating from a horse's proper balance, okay? We're deviating from any good balance at all, and that's, in a sense, we could say that's what gives us control of the runaway horse or something like that. Well, there are times and places where we might ask for that. If you're riding up to the edge of the Grand Canyon and your horse is galloping away, disengage the damn hindquarters and we'll talk about it later, right? But if it's something that you're doing every 10 strides in the arena, disengaging the horse's hindquarters, you're overdoing it. You're overcooking it. It's one of those things from a foundation perspective we want to make sure that we can do in the event that it's necessary for safety's sake, but then we want to try not to do it if we can help it, okay? Because the way that spine works is there's very little roll this way, and specifically in that joint. When the hind leg steps too far under, it's going to cause that strain there. Okay, so just something to really be mindful of. When you're doing your lateral work, we talk about 3 tracks versus 4 tracks. And you hear the arguments about it all the time. And I would say generally 3-track is going to be safer for you in all cases. 4-track is fine so long as the body's in relative alignment. If you're going in a deeper 4-track and you're going with a lot of velocity or a lot of force, you're running the risk of really straining that because you're running the risk of the horse stepping beyond the midline and rolling through the pelvis in that case. And again, with that joint there, it's not designed to really do that. Okay, so we want to be careful of that because repeated use can just wear the body out in that way, which is also then putting the horse heavier on the forehand. And the idea of collection is that we bring the horse back off of the forehand, sitting them onto the haunches so they can better carry the rider forward. Okay? I hope that's making sense to everybody right there of why we would want to be really aware of how our horse is stepping. It's not life or death if you're walking in your lateral work, or even if you're doing a little bit of a trot in your lateral work and your horse goes a little too far, whatever, you can adjust that. Don't be afraid of that happening, but certainly be aware that you're not consistently, repeatedly, forcefully overdoing that. Okay.
There's a quick question.
Quick question.
That relates to that.
Okay.
If mounted, how can you feel if it's stepping beyond center?
If mounted, how can you feel if it's stepping beyond center? That's something that you're going to need to learn to feel through your seat. If it's really stepping beyond center, you're going to feel that the balance is going to be tipping to the forehand. Otherwise, you want to feel that hind leg is stepping under your seat. When it's stepping appropriately, you'll feel that there's more of a push upward into your seat as they're walking. You'll feel that that hind leg is getting stronger. If they step far beyond it, you're not going to feel that strength step in there. And like I said, you'll feel the horse fall almost always onto the inside shoulder when they're doing that. So perfect. Good timing throwing that one in there. Okay, so we wanted to talk about now the role of your horse's legs. I think this is an important piece to understand. I'm going to draw my horse on a bend. We talk about the driving leg. Right. We're going to talk about the supporting leg. We're going to talk about the leading leg. We want to know what do each of our horse's legs do as we're going through normal work and as we're going through our lateral work. Okay. We often have an obsession of the inside hind leg. Okay. It's important. That we would consider to be the driving leg. Okay. The balancing leg, the engaging leg. Because as our horse is tracking, that hind leg is going to be the one naturally oriented to step deeper under that center of mass as our horse is walking forward. Okay? This is if we don't have negative deviations happening. Okay? In this case, our horse is just tracking straight on our circle, we'll say. All right. The inside hind leg, okay, so this is, if you're taking notes, we would talk about the inside hind leg is going to be the primary driver and the primary balancer, okay? When we're talking about, and we'll get into this also, the balancing diagonals. Make sure, Tyler, that I come back to that. Don't let me stray from that. The balancing diagonals. When we're learning how to ride, when we're learning how to post, we're taught rise and fall with the shoulder on the wall because you can see it, right? The hind leg, if you try to focus on that too soon, you're going to be hanging upside down underneath your horse's belly. We rise and fall with the shoulder on the wall. In the trot, our horses diagonalize their legs. So when we're rising and falling with the shoulder on the wall, it's the inside hind and the outside front. Okay? So this outside shoulder, we would say, is also a balancer. Okay? The balancing leg. We've got a balancing hind leg and a balancing shoulder. Okay? Now, that's appropriate at any gait, all right? And if we think about the footfall patterns in our regular gaits, our trotting gaits. I know we have some riders with gaited horses that have signed on for this lecture. The idea of balance applies the same. The idea of what the legs do as far as their roles will apply the same. I'm not going to go into all the individual gaits, simply because that's not my specialty and I would probably mess something up for you there. But what we're talking about as far as how the horse is moving through all the lateral work and what the job of the legs is, that's going to apply whether it's a gaited horse or a trotting horse. But when we're talking about our gaits, our walk we know is a 4-beat gait, right? The 4-beat lateral gait. The trot is a 2-beat diagonalized gait, right? And the canter is that 3-beat gait that still maintains the diagonal balancing legs. Okay, so let's say you're making a transition from trot to canter. In the trot, you've got your diagonal legs, your diagonal legs, your diagonal legs, your diagonal legs. That's your 2 beats. In the canter, the landing sequence is outside hind, diagonal pair, inside front. So really the only leg that changes from trot to canter in its function is the outside hind leg. It just speeds up and breaks apart from its diagonal partner. Okay? The balancing legs remain the same, should remain the same in the walk, in the trot, and in the canter. We often talk about the walk as being the hardest gait to ride and the easiest gait to ruin. And I think that one of the big reasons for that is that it's the only gait, the natural gait there, it's the only natural gait of this trotting horse that we're talking about that does not have the balancing diagonal diagonalized. They move separately. Okay? I think that's one of the big reasons why the walk can be the hardest to ride, the easiest to ruin. So, well, what the heck do the other legs do? Okay? The inside shoulder, or the inside foreleg, is a leading leg. It's supposed to be guiding the direction of the horse. Okay? Your horse is cantering on a right lead or a left lead, right? That's that shoulder that's guiding through there. When we talk about my horse is dropping their inside shoulder, what we really mean is he's now balancing on the inside shoulder. Okay? So I would argue your horse is on the wrong diagonal, right? When we talk about diagonals, again, we learn our diagonals when we're rising, and we talk about a rider being on the right diagonal or the left diagonal, or the right diagonal or the wrong diagonal. But very infrequently do we hear somebody talk about, is your horse on the right diagonal? Okay? And oftentimes a horse that's out of balance, they're not using their balancing diagonal appropriately. I would say that they've fallen to the wrong diagonal. Okay? When we talk about my horse is bulging through the outside shoulder, he feels like his outside shoulder wants to lead me away, wants to take me away. That's going to always be associated with the other shoulder carrying more weight. So again, he's not in the proper balance. Okay? When we talk about the outside hind leg, what's its job? Okay? The outside hind leg is a stabilizing leg. Okay? It's a stabilizing leg. The inside hind is a driver and a balancer. The outside hind is stabilizing. It's helping to keep everything on track. What we see when we talk about disengaging the horse's hindquarters, we see this inside hind step really deep underneath the horse, and we see the outside hind flinging out there in the next county. Okay? It's not stabilizing. It's not able to do its job if the inside hind is disengaging because of how that body works. That sends that hind leg clean out away from the body. It's not capable of stabilizing in that case. It needs to still be tracking forward underneath the horse's body as we go. Okay? So we want to think about that. It's easy to obsess, especially when we start talking about our lateral work. It's easy to obsess about the inside hind leg or the driving hind leg and lose our awareness of what all the other legs are doing also. Because the truth is, we're riding all 4 of them. We're not just riding one of those legs. Okay? So really important for us to think about what's the role of each of our legs. Again, the inside hind would be the primary driver and balancer. The outside hind is a stabilizing leg. The inside shoulder is the leading shoulder, or the inside front leg. And the outside front leg is a balancer. Okay? This changes when we talk about some of our lateral work. It also changes if we're talking about a horse that's crooked or falling down or out of balance or whatever. But in most cases, when the horse is straight, moving into the direction that they're organized, that's going to be the role of each of their legs. All right. So want to take a minute, see if we have any questions in there, and then we're going to talk about We're going to get started with talking about our leg yield. We're going to start going through our breakdown of each of our lateral movements.
Someone is asking you to please expand on the 2, 3, and 4 track and the difference between them.
Expand on 2, 3, and 4 track and the difference.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, and I'm glad that you've asked me that. That's an important piece. So if we go back to the picture that we had in the beginning of the arena tracks, okay, when the horse is on the outside track, their body was straight along the rail or along the perimeter. If they were on the second track or the inside track, their body was on the just inset from that. If they were on the third track, they were just inset from that, and so on and so forth. When we apply this in our lateral work, I'm going to just use this horse here. When we apply this with our lateral work, if this horse was going, say, straight down a fence, right? So here's our fence. You see how the haunches are on what we would call the outside track, and the shoulders come into the inside track. This technically we're getting into shoulder in this case. So we have 1 track, 2 tracks, 3 tracks here if we're following the movement and the orientation of the horse's legs. So this is our 3-track movement. Sometimes, and this is where the terms are really important, sometimes we will hear people talk about 2-tracking a horse. That's going to get more into our leg yield where they're moving forward and diagonal, okay? Otherwise, if our horse was straight and the shoulders were aligned in front of the haunches, they would be moving on 2 tracks, but that's different than 2-tracking. It's semantics is what that comes down to. So this horse here, as we've drawn the lines, this horse would be traveling on 3 tracks. Outside hind on 1, inside hind with the outside front on the 2nd, and the inside front on its 3rd track there. If our horse was angled more inward, that the inside hind was not lined up with the outside front, think more sideways, then we're going to be seeing a deviation where each leg would be on its own track. So that's our 4 tracks in there. That's where we were talking. It's pretty easy if we're going through with a lot of power, a lot of force, or a lot of repetition. It's easy to overdo those 4 tracks and just start wearing the body out from the SI perspective, okay, the sacroiliac joint perspective.
Thinking of the in-hand work, position 1 and 2, and how we must be careful with how the horse is placing its hind leg. What is the problem if the horse is not stepping all the way to the center? Is it also bad for the sacroiliac joint, or is the horse simply not getting the full benefit of the exercise? How can we help if the horse step under closer to center line?
Okay, perfect. So that question sounds like it's coming from somebody who's worked with me in hand or as part of maybe the Developing Balance in Hand online program where we talk about position 1, position 2. Position 1 basically being a shoulder in on a small circle. Position 2 being a counter shoulder in on a small circle. So the idea of the horse, if the horse is not stepping that hind leg under the center of mass, is there a detriment to the body for that? I would say there's not a detriment. There's just not as much of a benefit as if the horse were stepping to the midline. How do we help the horse to step more to the midline? That's going to be more of the guidance with your stick, or with your whip, with your whatever your aid is that you're using to help talk to the hind leg specifically. It may also be that we need to slow the shoulders down a little more. Thinking slow the shoulders, speed the haunches as we're going. Being careful not, of course, to over track there. It may also be helpful to bring this in tiny doses. If a horse is maybe not necessarily strong enough to do that very well or very consistently, it's helpful to do that in small doses also to begin building that strength, and more importantly to begin building the horse's confidence in stepping underneath that way. So if they're not stepping under, is that going to be a detriment to the body? no, that's not going to be harmful. It's just not going to be as helpful as if they were stepping to the midline. Yeah, fantastic question.
Talking of inside leg, can you explain shoulder fore and shoulder in? Not sure if this is appropriate now or for later.
We're going to be getting to that really quickly. Yeah.
I have heard recently that the horse should learn to lead with its outside front leg. Would you say that has any truth in it, or does the horse need to lead with the inside front only?
That's a tricky question. I would say from my perspective and from the way that I use these words, it would be easy for me to answer, but not knowing the intention of the person who's talking about this, talking about the horse should lead with the outside shoulder, I would question, are they talking all the time? Are we talking about, I don't know, maybe a reining horse or rein cow horse doing a turnaround? What are we talking about when we say the horse is leading with that? I think I would need to know more about exactly what we're meaning by those words and in what situations if we're talking that the horse should be leading with the outside leg, because from my perspective and from the semantics that I'm using these words, the outside shoulder needs to be supporting and stabilizing so that the inside can reach up. Well, a great way to see this and to see that if this is happening properly or not is when we're riding our horse in the corner. Does your horse ride through the corner by dropping down into that inside shoulder, which is then going to be negatively affecting the vertical balance that we talked about earlier, that turning like a motorcycle? Or does your horse, we could say, stand up in the outside shoulder and reach through with the inside shoulder? Okay, so that's balancing or stabilizing even on the outside shoulder to be leading with the inside shoulder. I hope that that's helpful. Again, it's hard to make specific comments about what somebody else might be saying or what you might be hearing without really knowing the intention behind that and maybe what those other meanings might be. So that's why I'm so big on trying to really clarify what I mean by the words I'm using. I hope that that's helpful. I hope that didn't come across as more confusing for anybody.
So if my horse tends to drop the inside shoulder, how do I get him back on balanced diagonal legs?
Leg yield. Leg yield, leg yield, leg yield, and shoulder in. And we're going to be talking about that, both of those here pretty shortly.
If a horse is going actually straight in center of an arena, should a leg step under slightly with hind legs in walk, or are legs as table in four corners?
Oh, as table legs in four corners. Yeah, I totally get that. So if and that's again a fantastic question. If our horse is tracking on a straight line, geometrically straight line, like as if we're coming down the center line, is the horse going to be tracking, stepping more with one hind leg or another, or should the horse be stepping, right, more with one hind leg or another? That's going to be a moment where we get to decide what is inside and what is outside, but we're hoping that those legs are tracking straight underneath the horse, as the question was, kind of like that table straight as we go. But it would be important to know before we get to the corner of the arena or the end of the arena, which direction are we going to head, because that's going to dictate which leg we're preparing to become that leg that steps deeper under the center of mass. That would be different if we're, say, in a shoulder in down the center line. But the question was about if the horse is, straight in the linear fashion. Yeah.
Should the horse have equal weight on all four legs?
I would say that ultimately our goal is that our horse is able to carry equal weight on all four legs. The idea of that being a reality for most horses, particularly at the beginning stage of their training, it's just not going to happen that way. And that's one of the reasons why it's important for us to be working our horses balanced in both directions so that we're not overdeveloping strength to one side or another. Again, ultimately, we want to feel like left and right leg carrying equal weight, whether it's front legs or hind legs. But the reality is that when we're doing that, if we're tracking forward, we're tracking straight, most horses are not going to necessarily have the balance and the strength to be able to do that. So while that might be a goal, that's certainly not going to be the reality for a lot of horses until they develop to a higher level of strength and balance. Yeah.
That's it for now.
Perfect. All right. Very good. So that's going to take us into leg yield. It's also going to take me into a sip of water. I'll just erase it here. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in and sticking with me, and thank you for all of your questions as we go. This is going to be great. This is an opportunity if you've organized to have a saddle there. I've got a little saddle stool here that I'm sitting on. If you've organized to have a saddle with you that you can sit on for part of this lecture, now would be the time to bust that out. Get ready with that, because when we start talking more specifically about the lateral moves, that's when we're going to be talking about our aids, and being in the saddle hopefully can help you to really clarify and kind of integrate these ideas into your body. Awkward moment when the whole world is staring at you drinking water, right? You guys can take a little...
Everyone look away.
Oh yeah, everyone look away. Talk amongst yourselves, a little break for a moment. Oftentimes in our live lectures, this is where we take like the 10-minute break or whatever, but I'm just going to roll right through. And of course, if you need to take a break, if you've been sitting here staring at me on your computer screen, first, I'm sorry. And second, the replay will be available for this for quite a while. So don't be afraid to step away, and you can come back to it later. You can always, review what you might have missed. And people have been asking a lot about how long is this video going to be up, and I got a little secret for you. You can download it if you want to. Totally feel free to do that. And just don't go like selling it to anybody, right? But yeah, if you guys are interested in downloading this video so that you can have it forever to look back on, and who knows, maybe in a year or two I'll have better information and I'll be a little smarter, and you'll be able to say, hey, you said this here, and now you know more. That would be great, right? I would love to have that be the case. All right, one more second, then we'll go. Have any other questions happen to pop up, Kelly?
Nope.
Awesome. And we have quite a few people on here watching. It says we have almost 130 people watching live. That's awesome. That's almost half of you guys. Okay, so we're going to talk about leg yield. All right. When we're talking about leg yield, we want to talk about what's the purpose, what's the reason, right? The purpose of our leg yield is to help supple our horse. Leg yield will also help to relax the body and release tension. You'll hear a lot of trainers say that leg yield is like aspirin for the horse's back, right? It's really good for suppling and releasing tension, okay? The way that the leg yield works, we can operate it in two different ways. We can operate it with a straight body or with a bent body. I personally use it a ton on circles. Okay, I think it's a great way to help change the size of your circles as well as suppling your horse at the same time. So a question came up earlier about suppling, right? This is a great way to do that, okay? We can do it on our straight lines also. We want to be mindful of just how sideways we go, that we don't go too far with the hind leg stepping beyond midline because, well, we've already talked about why, because on that. Again, if we're walking, totally most of the time, but it's when we add, velocity and power, more weight to that it becomes an issue. So if I want to make sure that I'm not getting in the way of the camera here. If we have our straight horse, the leg yield is going to happen. We're going to say that this is our inside and this is our outside. Okay. when we're asking for the leg yield, I'm going to explain the mechanics first, and then we're going to talk about our aids. The mechanics of the leg yield, the horse will move forward and sideways. Okay? I think about that as being almost like a staircase. If you were to look down at your horse, you would see that they're going at kind of a diagonal line. Okay? I think about it as a staircase in a sense. It's forward and over, and forward and over, and forward and over, and forward and over. I guess if you're looking from above, it might even be a zigzag, but when we draw it on the board, it looks a bit more like a staircase, right? Your horse is traveling forward and sideways. How much sideways? You get to dictate that. How much forward? You get to dictate that also, or you hope you do as the rider. The inside hind is going to be stepping forward and through, okay? The outside hind stepping open and through. That leading shoulder, the side shoulder stepping across, the outside shoulder stepping across. If we go sideways enough, this becomes more those 4 tracks that we were talking about. If we have more straightness with it, it becomes that 3 tracks that we were talking about. And I hope the way that I drew that out and described that earlier makes sense to you, because that's going to be really important for all of the lateral work as we go. So this is our leg yield, forward and sideways. Okay. Let's talk for a second about the leg yield on the circle, and then we'll talk about our aids. So on our circle, I'm going to draw kind of our circle lines ahead of our horse also. On our circle, a leg yield would basically expand the size of our circle. Okay. What I like about that is that if we're working from soft flexion and equal bend, it's like we're suppling and utilizing all the joints in the horse's body equally. Where with the straight leg yield, it can be pretty easy for the horse to brace in some places if they have that as a tendency. So it can sometimes be a little more challenging to work that out. That's why I love leg yielding from the circle. And it's much less likely to run into the challenge of over tracking when we're leg yielding from a circle, simply because of that natural bend that's already in the horse's body. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like or feel like. In both these cases, the inside hind leg maintains its job as the primary driver and balancer. All of the legs maintain the job that we talked about when we broke that down as the driver, the leader, the balancer, and the stabilizer. Okay. So now let's talk about your aids as we're going. So these horses are tracking to the right, and in this case, leg yielding left. Okay. We want to make sure that we break this down, because I don't want you to get into any trouble with your instructor if you go coach and they call this same movement a right leg yield, right? There's 2 ways to say this. This is a leg yield left, or this is a right leg yield. What do we mean by that? The inside leg, we could say the horse is leg yielding off of the right leg. It gets a little tricky, and again, it's just semantics. A right leg yield is the same as a leg yield left. So be careful what side of the leg yield you put the word on, right? Because that's going to dictate what that looks like. Hope that didn't confuse anybody. too much, but you may sometimes hear instructors use those interchangeably. Think about is, for the most part, if you're tracking left or if you're tracking right, your leg yield would be expanding the size of your arena, right? So if your track, or the size of your figure, whatever, if you're tracking right and you're asked for a leg yield, naturally that's going to be a leg yield to the left direction, opening your circle up. If you're tracking to the left or circle left and you're asked for a leg yield, it's going to be the left leg yield will be leg yielding right. And opening your circle from there. When you are straight and you're asked for a leg yield, it's important to know, do I want to go left or right? Otherwise, it's the leg yield kind of, we could say, always grows from the inside out. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Now, when we talk about our aids, okay, this is going to be really important and something that you'll start to notice a theme here. Okay, if we're sitting square, okay, and I'm going to try to face to the camera. In a square fashion here, so I hope my alignment is good for you. We want to think about your inside leg is always going to be going to be kind of hanging right underneath you. Outside leg always slightly back, okay, maybe a couple inches behind, depending on the size of your horse's body or the length. Too. But we want to think that outside leg, if we're coming along here on our circle, remember what we said, the outside hind leg is a stabilizer. Your outside leg essentially talks to the stability of that horse's outside hind leg, okay, and helps to stabilize it. I think of it a lot of times like a guardrail going down the highway, right? It sets a limitation. It's not always pushing with it, but it sets a limitation. So your outside leg is back slightly, and your inside leg hanging right underneath you. Okay. Now, there's reasons for this. Okay, this is going to us to provide the stability within our seat to encourage the proper balancing diagonal. Okay, it's going to help us balance to where we need to be over our seat bones, which we'll get into in a moment. Uh, Also, more from the structural perspective, your inside leg talks to more the thoracic sling, helps to lift the thoracic sling of the horse, where your outside leg helps to talk a little bit more to the abdominals in those moments, where we're stabilizing more from the haunches. So the inside leg, we could say, is an elevator. The outside leg is a collector, right? If we think about it in that perspective. There are, from a foundation perspective, from a cow horse perspective, sometimes from the reining perspective, there is a deviation in there because we're talking about moving haunches away and pushing shoulders through. I'm not going to say that that's wrong, okay? But those movements aren't necessarily asking for collection. They're asking more for agility in those instances. When we're talking about asking for collection and the way that we need to be balanced, this is going to be where we're going to want our legs to be. Okay, so I'm not, if you're used to riding in the other way, I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm just going to say this is going to really help you in your lateral work to help the horse to organize better within their own body so that they can build the strength and suppleness and that sort of thing that we're talking about. So again, inside leg hanging underneath you. So if you're sitting in your saddle at home watching this, just let your inside leg drop underneath you. Your outside leg, you may have to shift and shimmy around a little bit, but your outside leg is going to be slightly behind. Now, what about those seat bones? We hear people talk all the time about inside seat bone on, outside seat bone on, more weight to this seat bone, more weight to that seat bone. I think that gets too damn cerebral. I think that gets us too much in our head and we get to blocking that way. If we're sitting, what I want to think about is which hind leg, in this case, in the leg yield, is stepping deeper under the horse's body. Well, that'd be the inside hind leg, right? If I end up sitting into that inside seat bone, I'm going to be blocking that hind leg because I'm going to be blocking his ability to lift his rib cage, right? So I don't want to be sitting into that inside seat bone and pushing my horse sideways because it's going to drop the balance when we do that, and it's going to impede his ability to really step under in the way that we're looking for that can build power. What I also don't want to be doing is sitting too heavy in the outside seat bone because then I'm going to be blocking the movement from the body on that side. So when we talk about our aids, I want to talk about your intention more than your seat bones. If I'm thinking I'm coming forward and a leg yield left, I don't want to be over here to go over there, right? I want to think, guide my seat into the direction that I want to go, all right? May there be slightly more weight to one seat bone or another as we go into our lateral work? Yes, potentially, but I think of that as being more an effect of what we're doing, right, than the cause of the lateral work. If I shift my seat and my horse follows underneath me.
Can you move back slightly so that they can see your seat more? Or we can tilt the camera?
Oh, I don't know if I can maybe even. Oh, nope, can't lift this up. They want to see my seat more. I'll see if I can stand in the chair here. I'm going to hover. It's good for my jumping position, right? So, yeah, I'll try to do this without tipping my chair and dying. So I'm going to be leg yielding toward the left. So my intention through my body is going to be coming to the left. This is kind of exaggerating even here, but I'm thinking coming to the left as I go. Okay, I hope that's more helpful for everybody seeing what we're doing there. Again, inside leg hanging underneath us, outside leg hanging slightly back. Intention carrying us, in this case, to the left. Not thinking, put more weight in this seat bone or put more weight in that seat bone. Because if we do that, think about what the horse feels. If I'm guiding my seat across to the left in this case, if my horse follows perfectly with me, okay, here I am and here's my horse. If my horse follows perfectly with me, what change is he going to feel in my seat? He should feel like we're right there in unison, right? If my horse doesn't go, there's going to be a difference in the feel, and that's when maybe my whip or leg or whatever we're using can say, oops, there goes the light. That's where that can say, hey, step up underneath me a little bit more, or remember this is what needs to happen, and that can help encourage him to come underneath us better. So when we talk about deviating, we can only deviate to the degree that the horse can follow. Okay, that's going to be really important for us. Again, that's going to keep us from tipping and dropping and all of those things. Okay, what's happening with our reins? Our outside rein, think about what happens in these feet. That outside shoulder does what? Stabilizes. The inside shoulder does what? It leads. Okay, if I'm leg yielding out to the left, what we see a lot of times from riders that are struggling to get it to happen is they kind of open outward, right, with that outside rein. In our foundation program, some of our foundation programs, we see that exaggerated sit-in, open out kind of an idea. When that happens, when we do that with our rein, we're actually pulling the horse in that direction from their shoulder, causing that to be a leading shoulder. Okay, so our outside rein, to support the stability of that outside shoulder, or outside front leg, is our outside rein should stay connected right underneath us. Okay, or not underneath us, but right in front of us, at the horse's shoulder. Okay, our inside rein, it's not that we're going to be opening in a big way, but our inside rein needs to kind of have that feel that it's allowing. It's opening slightly. There's times riders in clinics have heard me say often, hand me your inside rein, kind of opening that way. That's going to give freedom for that inside shoulder to confidently reach. If we take, and we see this happen all the time, if we take that inside rein and we draw it into the withers, we push it into the shoulder, it's going to oftentimes cause an increase of inside flexion, which is going to cause that shoulder to be more heavy. At the very least, it's going to block that shoulder, which is then going to cause it to become a weight a balancing shoulder, which again is not its job, right? Its job is to be leading. It almost feels completely backwards because it feels as though you're blocking the horse from going that way. You're not going to have the kind of contact that blocks the horse. What we're doing is, in this case, helping our horse to discriminate between the seat aids and the rein aids, right? Where the seat says, hey, let's go here, and the reins say, I'll stabilize you to maintain your bend, okay? I hope that that's making sense. We're working on fixing our lighting over here. Our lamp fell, and there we've got some better light back. We've got like a odd ball of light here, but I'll just not draw there if I can help it. Yeah, it'd be good. It'd be good. So again, going through the review here of the leg yield and then the aids for the leg yield. The purpose of the leg yield is suppleness. It's going to help with balance. Okay, when we're asking this from our horse, inside to outside, so we'd say that the horse in this case is moving away from the bend. Okay, his bend is going right, he's moving left, so he's moving away from the bend. All right, our aids, your inside leg's hanging underneath you, your outside leg is slightly back, your outside rein against the withers, your inside rein slightly open, and your intention is forward and sideways at the angle that you want your leg yield to be at. This is where having a destination is a really important thing to think about. If you're just starting leg yield with your horse, well, you're going to be lucky to go very far in any direction anyway, but you want to still be thinking, at what angle do I want to go? If your horse is more confident with it, I want to be more thinking, where do I want to land? Where's my destination in the leg yield? Okay, where do I want it to end? When we talk about our lateral movements, we want to always feel that there's a beginning, there's a flow, and there's an end of the movement. So if we're asking for any of our lateral movements, I want to feel, when do I want to start? Can we flow there without interruption of the movement, of the cadence, of the balance? And when we get to where we're going, can we stop that and go forward or change or whatever, right? So there's a start, a flow, and a finish of all of our lateral movements. So that's our leg yield. And we had questions pop up in the leg yield here. And sorry if I seemed distracted while I was watching them adjust the light. Thank you guys for doing that.
Teaching a young horse to leg yield, is it best to teach them from the ground first?
Is it best to teach a young horse to leg yield from the ground first? I think all of the lateral work is easiest taught first from the ground. Okay, and this is something in our video, the video module that I'm going to make available as soon as this lecture is over. We're going to show you leg yielding with Tyler's horse from the ground, as well as I coach her from the saddle, and I show you from Nico, my Frisian. So we've got lots of different setups there that you can see how we would ask for, and then even how we would initiate the leg yield in there. But my thought is that all of the lateral work is easiest to teach from the ground first. David and I were talking about this yesterday. I think about this as being like calisthenics before going to the gym. We learn how to do a push-up before we learn how to do a bench press. We can help the horse understand how to use their body in the way that we want them to for this, whether it's for unlocking or for engaging or for whatever, any of the lateral movements, before they have to carry the weight of the rider. So it's less cumbersome, I think, for them that way. Do you have to start from the ground? No, absolutely not. We've got lots of riders that are absolutely capable of helping that horse to learn it first from the ground, from their back, and they can all learn it first from their back. My preference, just based on my experiences, I like to teach them first from the ground, and then I feel like most of the time they already understand it when you get to their back. Neither one's better or worse. That's just personal preference.
Aside from disengagement, is it safe to ask for lateral work in a young 4-year-old horse?
Yes. Yeah. Aside from disengagement, aside from over-engagement also, and it's how long are you going to be asking for it. Leg yield? Oh, I would do a ton of leg. I'd like to do a lot of leg yield anyway, but I don't think that there's an age limit necessarily on leg yield. Leg yield is a movement that I start on the first ride on a young horse, because if you're going to work a gait, if you're going to, for me, if you're going to pick your coffee up off the fence, if you're going to, whatever, anything like that you're going to do, there's likely going to be leg yield incorporated into that. Always, with all of our lateral work, be mindful of how much, how fast, how hard, how soon, right? If we're doing anything in excess, obviously it's not good for any horse, but I don't think there is such a thing as too early from the physical perspective to talk about these things. It doesn't mean on our 4-year-old horse that if we haven't done a shoulder in, we initiate the shoulder in today, and next week we're going, 60 meters down the rail in a shoulder in. You're certainly not going to be doing that, because that's about developing strength and that sort of thing. But I don't think there's any time that's necessarily too early to begin having the conversation. Right?
To clarify, there's no flexion on a straight leg yield?
There would be very limited bend on the straight leg yield, and it would be bend that would be in there simply because of that stepping under and that guiding out. It would be very limited. When we talk about flexion, there would be a slight, if I were to draw the nose here, if I were to draw the head, there would be a slight inside flexion. Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question.
What is unique to the leg yield that differs from all other lateral movements? He's having a hard time remembering them all and what makes one different from another.
Absolutely. So what makes the leg yield different from the other lateral movements is that both ends of the horse are equally aiming for the sideways movement. Okay? Whereas in the other lateral work, we name the lateral movement by the part of the body that deviates from the track. Okay? So, and hopefully I'll be able to clarify this more, but just know at this point that the leg yield, both ends of the horse are equally tracking sideways as we go there.
How does the outside leg slightly back not be confused with asking for the canter?
The activity of the leg. Okay. The outside leg would be resting back, and basically I would say at all times, unless you're asking for that cow horse turn or that sort of thing. But the outside leg would always be slightly back. Whether or not that gets confused with canter would be about the activity of that leg. Okay, we're talking the leg is there. When we ask for canter, the leg becomes active in the asking process. Okay, I hope that's clear.
Would it help to carry your hands in the direction of the leg yield?
No. There. How's that for a simple answer? No, it's not helpful to carry your hands in the direction of the leg yield because it causes a deviation of the responsibility of the front legs. If a horse is really, really sticky and they're completely not understanding, there will be maybe a one-step moment where I'll talk to that front leg, in this case the front left leg, where I'll say, pick this up and step this out here, if they're really, really just stuck in that idea. Otherwise, even from a young stage, I try not to do that deviation. So I would talk about breaking down leg yield as foundation leg yield or connecting leg yield. Okay, our foundation leg yield is those moments, and it would be moments really. It wouldn't need to be more than moments for most horses. That's how I should say that. That you would open and individualize each leg in that idea. Once they've got a baseline understanding of that, keeping the reins connected in the way that we're talking is going to be really easy for them to understand. Because ultimately what happens, if the shoulders go too much, the haunches will begin to lag behind, right? And that's where we run into balance problems and things like that. And again, the idea is that in the leg yield, the haunches and the shoulders move equally together.
Should your eye focus be straight or in the direction of travel?
I'm always going to be thinking in the direction of my travel. Focusing, I guess you could say that that's two different things. In the leg yield, I'm certainly going to be aiming for wherever I want to land. If it's on my circle, I'm going to be focusing ahead and forward to the next track that I want to be on. If I'm coming, say, straight down the center line and leg yielding out to the outside corner or something like that, I'm going to be looking for the corner. I'm going to be looking where I'm headed. Yeah.
Does the inside leg tap the horse in rhythm or is it quiet?
That's going to depend. Does the inside leg tap the horse in rhythm or is it quiet? I'm always thinking the seat initiates, the leg motivates, the rein validates, and the whip mediates. Okay? So, and I should have mentioned that at the beginning also, so thank you for allowing that to come up or inspiring that to come up. So the seat initiates. The seat says, hey, let's go here, or hey, let's do this, right? The leg says, give me more. The rein says, yes, that's right, or no, not quite. And the whip says, hey, you forgot something. So if I go with my seat, and my horse is resisting, I'm not going to add my leg because the leg says give me more, and I'm not going to ask for more resistance. Why would we want that, right? If I use my seat and the horse begins to soften and follow my seat, then if I want more, then that's when the leg will touch, and it will touch in time with the thrust phase of the inside hind leg. That's the only moment where we can ask that to come through with more energy, with more reach, with more speed, with anything like that. Okay, so when the horse is following the seat, that's when I'm going to touch with my leg. Now, at the very basic beginning foundation stages, when you're still teaching your horse, hey, this leg means move over here, this leg means move over there, that's when there's a little bit of a blending of this, but I'm still trying to always think about that thrust phase of the inside hind leg, because that's the only real time the horse can understand the leg anyway. Okay, that's an important piece to remember, is the horse can only understand the aids when they're given in time with the footfall.
Do you know why some classical trainers do not teach leg yield?
Well, I've had discussions with some of them that don't teach leg yield, that say that they don't like leg yield, say that they don't use leg yield. And you know what I find interesting is that I often have seen that they will do something, that they will call something that's a leg yield. I'm being a little cheeky with this. I don't want to upset anybody, but a lot of times when we hear somebody say, I never do leg yield, I wouldn't ask for leg yield, a lot of what they do is really a leg yield, but they might be calling it something different. So it's semantics in there for some of that. Now, there is an idea of only going straight with that horse and deviating then into the lateral movements. Can I talk to that necessarily? I can't. I can't always say what or why somebody else is doing or not doing something. I find it helpful for me to use leg yield to supple the length of the horse's spine. That's all I'm going to say there. You know, I'm not saying that those other horses that aren't used or aren't ridden in a technical leg yield, I'm not going to say that their spines aren't supple. I'm going to say I find it really helpful for me to supple the spine and to educate the horse about my aids when I do use a leg yield.
This person says, I was taught if I was turning horse to the left, I should use my right leg pressure. Should I be using my left leg back a little?
Read that one more time.
I was taught if I was turning a horse to the left, I should use my right leg pressure. Should I be using my left leg back a little?
Should I be using my left leg back a little? If I'm turning left, okay, I'm going to be tracking left, I still want my left leg underneath me, okay? I wouldn't want to use it back. The outside leg being back slightly and using that, that's going to help encourage that horse's outside hind leg to still be that stabilizing leg. So I think that's 100% okay. I'm all about that because it's going to keep, ideally, theoretically, it's going to keep the horse's haunches from fishtailing to the outside. So I'm totally okay with that. That's something that I think maybe needs a little bit of clarity too, is we hear riders talk about the horse bending around the inside leg. That doesn't always mean that we're pushing the horse with the inside leg to create the bend. It simply means that the bend through the horse's body wraps around the inside leg, as if the inside leg were kind of a center point of reference, like a fence post or something, and the horse is bending around that. It doesn't mean the fence post is bending the horse. It just means the horse is bending around the fence post. I hope that that's helpful and not more confusing.
A couple people are asking you to repeat your clarification of what the seat, leg, rein, and whip do.
Totally, absolutely. So the seat initiates. Okay, I'm going to actually write this out for you. The seat initiates. Another way of saying it is that the seat says let's go here or let's do this. And it does that through mild shifting, and the primary aid of the seat is going to be intention. Okay? Because our job is to stay centered over top of the center of our horse's spine. If I deviate off to the outside of my horse's spine, now I've messed up the balance, and I've also blocked movement. Okay? Likewise, if I deviate to the inside of the spine. So our job, I'm always trying to think of myself as being a center pole for the carousel horse, right? I don't want to be crooked, and I don't want to be too much shifted off one side or another, because that limits how the carousel horse is able to operate. So the seat initiates, the leg motivates. The leg motivates. The leg says, give me more. It can be more step, more speed, more energy, more reach, more whatever. The leg says, give me more. Okay? Seat initiates, leg motivates, the rein validates. The rein validates. If the horse bulges into the rein and the rein closes, the rein says, nah, not quite. But if the horse is moving along and the rein maintains a softness within the movement, the reins are saying, yep, that's right. Okay? So the reins say, yes, that's right, or no, not quite. The reins validate. Okay? The whip mediates. The whip mediates. In other words, the whip says, hey, you forgot something. So if I'm asking for, we'll go back to the leg yield. If I'm asking for a leg yield and the horse isn't following the seat and this inside hind leg isn't stepping deeper because of the because of the work that we would have initiated on the ground, the horse will know that if I touch with the whip, they need to step that hind leg under deeper, right? So if I shift with my seat and they don't follow, the whip says, hey, you forgot to follow my seat. Let's talk to that hind leg. Okay? So the seat initiates, the leg motivates, the rein validates, and the whip mediates. I hope that makes sense.
That's it for now.
That's all the questions for now? Perfect. All right, so now we're going to talk about leg yield. All right, after another sip here. I'm getting a little dry. All right. You guys are awesome. These questions are fantastic. Okay, shoulder in. It's funny, David asked me to begin with before we started the lecture, do you stand for this whole thing? I said, well, yeah, usually. Then I bring the seat out and I'm sitting for the whole damn thing.
You're welcome.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of nice to hang out here with this. Okay, so shoulder in. I'm going to draw my horse. And now I'm going to draw the fence. Or the arena wall, or the perimeter, or the quarter line. Well, it wouldn't be the quarter line, but I'm going to draw a line of reference. Okay? When we're riding in a shoulder in, most of the time, our shoulder in is going to be the same angle as a 10-meter circle, or the same degree of bend as a 10-meter circle. If you could imagine me riding on a 10-meter circle here, it would go off of my whiteboard, obviously, if I had that in relation to the horse here. But as we're going in this shoulder in, remember what we said earlier, we name the lateral movement by the part of the body that deviates from the track. So what does that mean? In the shoulder in, then, it means the haunches dictate the track and the shoulders deviate from there. Okay? So we want to think about, what are the legs going to be doing? The inside hind leg is tracking forward and now under the body. Has come in, okay, to the second track. You'll remember the graphic that we were drawing when we were talking about first track, second track, third track, right? The outside shoulder comes inward to line up, essentially, with the inside hind leg, okay? The outside hind leg is on its own track. It's still heading down the track, just like the inside hind is. Okay? So you've got the outside hind on its own track, the inside hind and the outside shoulder lined up together, and the inside shoulder is on a track of its own. So there's our 3 tracks. Can we go 4 tracks? Can we deviate more? Yes. If we deviate more, let's say we're going real sideways, right? Let's say we're going real sideways here, and all 4 of those legs are on their own track, kind of going forward and sideways on their own track, all 4 legs deviating equally. Isn't that what we called a leg yield earlier? Right? I'm not saying all 4 track is inherently a leg yield, but if we go with enough bend in the body, we've taken that move from a shoulder in and turned it into a leg yield. So we want to be careful about that. Okay? And that's about the degree of forward and sideways reach of the legs. Okay? But so our shoulder in, the shoulders are deviating to the inside. Okay? The inside hind is tracking up with the outside front, okay, or is stepping toward the outside front, thereby stepping deeper under the mass, okay, deeper under the horse's body and under the weight. And the rider should feel that hind leg is pushing you a little bit more. You should feel a little bit more drive in that leg because it's landing and carrying more of the horse's body. The outside hind leg should still stabilize, okay? So we don't want it fishtailing, like what we talked about with the disengaging hindquarters piece. We don't want to feel that hind leg fishtailing out there. We want to feel that it's staying on its track, okay? The purpose of our shoulder in, okay, is to strengthen the horse, specifically the inside hind leg, okay? If you watch a horse go in shoulder in, when this inside hind leg lands under the horse, it lands under the weight, it's carrying more weight in the hock joint specifically, okay? At the loading phase of that step in the shoulder in is where that hind leg is going to get the benefit, okay? Or that's where it's going to feel it the most, essentially. So think about it as we're going to the gym. If it was us, right? We're going to the gym and we're doing pistol squats or something. You're doing a leg press with one leg bearing more weight than the other leg. So you're going to be working that leg more. That makes shoulder in really great for helping to rebalance a horse, for helping to strengthen a weak hind leg, again specifically toward the hock joint. That really makes it great to work that balance. It also makes it really important that we work our horse in both directions so that we're working for the strength equally on both sides. When we do our shoulder in, we can do it with a little more of a length to the body, which is going to be aiming for suppleness and soft encouragement of the inside hind leg, which I think is always recommended at the beginning when you're first educating your horse for this. This is why I love teaching it in hand, because it's easier to get more of that stretch and that releasing of the top line with the slight stepping under the hind leg. When they begin to develop more strength, and then we come up more into, we'll call it a working frame or a collected frame, that's when they're going to be doing more strength building and less suppling in those moments, okay? You're still going to get some suppleness within that, but it's more going to be focused on strength building. So, thinking again about what are the jobs of the legs, it's all going to be the same. Primary driver and balancer is the inside hind. Balancing leg is the outside front. Inside front is still leading leg. Outside hind is still a stabilizer. Let's think about our aids. Where are your aids going to be? I'll come across in front of you again. First, I want to think about when we're riding anything with our horse. Your shoulders guide their shoulders. Your hips guide their hips, okay? Where does this horse's hips head? They head straight down the track. So my hips are going to aim to stay straight down the track. Where do their shoulders go? In this case, it's slightly into the right. I'm going to come slightly into the right, okay? Imagine if you're riding a 10-meter circle. Your body's going to be bent and aligned on the arc of that 10-meter circle. When we're starting our shoulder in, that's that first step of a 10-meter circle. Okay, so a way that I like to ask my horse the first time for that shoulder in, and frequently I ask it this way, is I'll start with a 10-meter circle. And then when I get back to the track, I'll take one more step on that 10-meter circle, and then I keep my hips on the outside track. So I deviate slightly, saying, I'm gonna hang here. I'm gonna stay on the track. I kind of joke about it that I want my horse to think I want a 10-meter circle, but think I'm not really sure of where I want it to happen. Okay, we get that first step, and then we carry it slightly down the track. Now, the first time we ask our horse of this, you might just get into that position and halt and say, yeah, hey, get used to standing, slightly offset. Or then maybe we'll go into one step or two steps, always trying to do just a little less than what they feel confident being able to do. Okay, because if I push him to the edge of his confidence, now I've likely started to create tension or create an argument we could have avoided altogether in the first place. All right, let's think about what our aids need to do. Your inside leg still stays directly underneath you. Your outside leg still stays slightly back, because remember, that outside leg needs to help his outside hind leg to stay stable, potentially. I'm not saying you're pushing with that leg, but it would be there in case that outside hind begins to drift. Your inside leg is still saying energize, energize, energize as we can, right? The outside rein, his outside shoulder is still stabilizing. So guess what your outside rein's doing? It's still there to stabilize, okay? It's not tight, it's not hard, it's there as a stable point of reference. And your inside rein is going to think about being slightly open. Again, I'm not saying open it way wide unless we're really exaggerating in a teaching moment, which you'll see us do. I have Tyler do that in the video for the module of our leg yield and our shoulder in. So you'll see that come in there as a deviation. But when we're thinking about that, we want to make sure that we're not blocking that shoulder. We see a lot of riders that will bring that inside rein into the horse's shoulder. And what does that give us? That gives us flexion without bend, and oftentimes causes that inside shoulder to become heavy. Okay? It also, a lot of times, has a tendency to cause a rider to drop their inside shoulder, okay, kind of toward that inside hand. So we want to think, my hips stay on the track, my shoulders slightly deviate. So again, if you're sitting on your saddle, kind of play that position. This is our shoulder in to the right. Question came up earlier about the shoulder in versus the shoulder fore. Shoulder fore would be with half of that bend. So we would have less deviation with the front and the back. If you're looking at a really good, solid, steady shoulder in coming toward you on the rail, there would be those three it's kind of wonky for me to show this into the camera, but there'd be those three individual tracks. If you're looking at a shoulder fore coming toward you, you'll likely see all 4 feet without much length deviation. Okay.
Go with that really quick. Someone's
Okay.
asked. Is there a time when you would use a 4-track shoulder in, or would that just be a leg yield?
There can be times, there can be lots of times to use a 4-track shoulder in. ask that question again in 1 second. I'm going to finish my thought about the shoulder 4, but you're right on with that. The shoulder 4, so shoulder in we say is, based off of a 10-meter circle, right? It's the 10-meter bend. Shoulder four is more gradual. It's actually based off of a 20-meter bend.